Hello and welcome to the Roundtable Podcast. My name is Rafi. I'm joined today by Shogun. We're going to be talking about gang stalking, the nefarious psychological and technological means that can be used to discredit or destroy targeted individuals. We're going to get very deep into that. First, please follow us on the Roundtable Podcast YouTube channel. Join our Discord, Roundtable, where we do daily events, awesome things every day. Also follow us on our 4 other YouTube channels, join our BitChute, and check out our merch store. Without further ado, Shogun, all of that is in the description of the podcast. Without further ado, how are you doing, Shogun?
I'm very well, Rafi. Thank you very much. It's been a good day, and thank you for suggesting this conversation. I'm looking forward to getting into it once again.
Yeah, thank you. I think we had some good stuff, and I think we're ready to the point to really get a final kind of say out here, and it's gonna be something good. I think this is sort of an important podcast. So, before we get into exactly what gang stalking is exactly and what the intentions are and everything, would you like to take us back to what it was like when it just started for you? What was it like at the very beginning, and how did it start for you?
Well, I mean, first of all, I did not have any concept of gang stalking, nor did I interpret my experiences at the time as gang stalking until much later. It was only after I came to the Roundtable server, or rather after I created the Roundtable server, I guess it came to me, so to speak. That was when I met people like NSA, people like Zalaputas, people like Drakkar, and many others who, essentially educated me about this concept to the point that I started to see how it was possible to interpret my experiences through this lens. But if I was to say where my experience started, I guess that would be with 12 dudes with machine guns breaking into my house and abducting me at gunpoint, which is a pretty dramatic start. It wasn't very subtle in my case. But that was essentially the first beginning of it all, and then it all continued from that point. And I've told that story many times. And those people were police officers. They essentially raided my house at gunpoint, and they dragged me off and threw me in a cell. Fortunately, not a prison cell, although arguably, who knows. But yeah, so that was that. It was a psych ward, obviously, but there's some very strange aspects to that, especially given that at the time I was in my house with the door closed, with the windows closed, with my phone turned off, threatening nobody, doing nothing wrong. So that's why I would interpret that as somewhat strange.
I see. And then also there was one of them told you while you were being wheeled into the hospital that they had been paid a substantial amount of money to do this, correct?
Yeah, so when the guy was unloading me out of the police car, and they had handcuffs on my ankles and handcuffs on my wrists, and they put me in a wheelchair, and they said, guy pushing, he said $100,000 to push a wheelchair, easiest payday of my life, for like $100,000 just to push a wheelchair. Like, wow, something along those lines. And then it was very strange. And so then there was 2 regular cops in addition to the 12, whatever SWAT team guys, and they. I asked one of the nicer police officer guys, so that guy who's pushing me just said $100,000 to push a wheelchair. Like, what do you think he meant by that? And he goes, oh, I'm sorry, we usually try to be more professional than that. So I'm not sure entirely what to make of that. You can form your own conclusions.
Sure. And that was one of your first experiences related to gang stalking, but you didn't really know what it was at the time. Looking back, what do you think really happened that day? And knowing what you know about gang stalking now?
Well, I mean, it gets very complicated very quickly because, unlike NSA, I posit supernatural underpinnings to all of this. So I believe ultimately that Satan is the force behind this. And that would be consistent with my experience because I was having a religious experience, which is, through the Christian frame. And I had basically understood in this mystical experience that I was having immediately prior to this raid that Satan was the force in charge of this world, that God exists in a different realm apart from this world, and that Jesus was the messenger into this world from God's realm in order to essentially warn us about what's going on with Satan and also give us the tools to defeat and escape him while we're here. And so when that realization hit me, which at the time I interpreted as being born again, right? It's a Christian concept. I then called my best friend And I said, hey, and I told him my whole manifesto, everything I understood about, this, not, manifesto is a loaded term these days, but my whole concept about, God and Jesus, which is not new. It's basically the biblical narrative, AKA also a form of the Gnostic narrative is similar. But the point is, I said, well, now that I've realized this, just so you know, I'm probably going to get killed or thrown in prison or something along those lines in the near future. So just so you know, if I die or if I get thrown in prison, like, this is why. Because long story short, just like Neo in the Matrix, what happens when Neo wakes up, right? He makes contact with Morpheus and he starts understanding about the Matrix. Well, like 12 fucking or 100 fucking, pardon my language, Agent Smiths come into his office, right, and immediately arrest him, right? That's what happens. Because Satan, being in charge of all the kingdoms of the earth, as the Bible says, is therefore in charge of all the earth's police forces and psychiatric wards and all that. So if someone comes along who potentially poses a threat to him or his kingdom, or is prepared to testify to the gospel of Jesus Christ, that God so loved the world that whosoever believed in his Son, Jesus Christ, shall not perish but have eternal life, the devil hates it when this message is proclaimed or is going to be proclaimed. And that ties into gang stalking, because gang stalking is about discrediting someone through character assassination, slander, and libel, and things of that nature, or induced psychiatric illnesses, or other forms of stigmatization, incarceration, et cetera, in order to neutralize someone who may be a political threat or a cultural threat, right? So if someone becomes too influential of a leader, has too much of a following or has ideas that are too threatening, the governments of the world can use something like gang stalking and electronic harassment to neutralize that person by driving them crazy or making them seem crazy or whatever, framing them, putting things on their computer, and all the different things that NSA talks about, right? So that being the case, Satan also can engage in these tactics, and for similar reasons, all right? So that's sort of my understanding. Not that, I'm any special person, but I believe that a conscious attempt was made to destroy me before I became the threat that I was perceived to be.
I see, yeah. So there's an element of gang stalking called street theater, and you've experienced 2 or 3, as far as I can tell, very extreme forms of street theater, which is where the 2 people came out of a building and said he was born ready. Oh, he's ready. He was born ready. And the experience with the little black box with the camera and the button, and also the experience where the guy came up to you and said, like, keep running, stay with your training, you're not what they say you are. All of that to me seems like acts of street theater. So separating the spiritual element, the ET element, even the governmental element, how do you feel about street theater, and what happens when that happens to somebody?
Yeah, so street theater is easy to understand, right? So if I decided that I was going to target somebody with targeting of this nature, electronic harassment, gang stalking of this nature, right? So say for whatever reason I wanted, drive Crimson insane or discredit him because he's a threat to me or my political party or my interests or whatever, right? Very unethical, obviously, but people do these things. All I'd have to do is use a combination of what NSA's little thing correctly calls artifacts and agents. So an agent is essentially a human being, somebody who can make choices and act in the world. And an artifact is an object, something that cannot act in the world but can be placed strategically by agents. So an example of artifacts could be anything: a toy, a poster, a painting, a piece of graffiti scrawled on the walls, right? Any of these can be an object left here or there. These are artifacts, and people who approach you and interact with you or do things within your sensory field where you'll perceive them, these are agents. Now, through the combination of these 2 things, interfacing with a person's individual ontology, as NSA would say, meaning what they believe, this will cause influences in their mind state, influences in their perception of reality, which is essentially, gang stalking is all about gaslighting. And gaslighting is getting a person to question their sanity. So the whole purpose of gang stalking is to get a person to believe that they have gone insane, or to actually go insane, or for people around them to think they're insane or evil or whatever the case may be, right? So
or to be having a mental illness episode and then also think that you're insane and that the gang stalking is a part of that.
Well, yeah, they can target you when you're already having a mental illness, and or they can simulate a mental illness artificially through technology, and or they can traumatize you and stress you out until you actually have a psychotic break. So all of these are possible, and all of this is weaponized psychiatry, weaponized mind control. It was all developed through MK Ultra and all these other projects, right? They figured out the interface between trauma, mental illness, drugs, and technology, and they used it to influence people's behavior remotely and in untraceable ways. So there's so many different levels to this. But yeah, so street theater. So you gave some of my examples, and there's more. But, you know, two people approaching me, you know, 50-year-old male and female wearing, you know, black business clothing, carrying briefcase, shiny black shoes, stand in a strange position in front of me, looking side to side like fucking Secret Service agents, moving their feet in this weird pattern. And the woman looks at me and goes, "Look, he's ready." Or actually, the man looks at me and says, "Look, he's ready." And then the woman says, "Yeah, he was born ready," right? And why would someone approach a random stranger and say this? Or the guy who came up to me on the bus and said, "I know what you're doing. You're spreading lies through your phone. You're a flat earther. Hey, you're a flat earther spreading lies through your phone," right? While I'm doing my Discord thing on my phone, running the server. And again, I'm not a flat earther, but I've run flat earth events. And then he sprays me with a chemical and harasses me on a bus and says, "Look, all these people are normal. You're not normal. Like, get off the bus." Like crazy shit like that, right? Like, why was I on just sitting on a bus going home from work targeted in that way out of all the people on the bus, right? Is that really just a coincidence? And on and on. The police officers who returned a broken piece of wood to me, which was part of a cross that I had again been given in an act of gang stalking, where as soon as I came outside, this guy came up with this big wooden cross carved with like Celtic patterns and said it was for me and gave it to me, even though we'd never met before, and then said all this relevant shit to me. And then later I broke that cross and a piece of it came off. And so I put it down on the ground in a completely nondescript place just on the sidewalk and just walked home or whatever. I get a knock on the door later. It's fucking police officers, and they're like, "Shogun, we found the missing piece of your cross. We found the missing piece of your cross." Like this is some kind of big deal to them. And they return this little piece of wood to me about the size of a cell phone. So you got to ask yourself, how in the fuck would they have known that belonged to me? How would they have known where it was? And why would they have felt that it was important to return it to me? None of that makes any sense. Unless they're watching me 24/7, they would have had to have me under surveillance in order to see me put that piece of the cross down there, right? There's no other way that they would have known it was mine. So it's a guaranteed fact that the police at least are watching me essentially at all times, or at least I have to assume that they are. And furthermore, they have some interest in doing seemingly irrelevant things like returning a small piece of wood to me from a cross that was also given to me by someone I did not know. And I could also point out the recent case of the Winnipeg police saying to me, "I'm going to get myself fucking killed. I shouldn't have said, well, whatever." But anyway.
We're talking about this an awful lot whenever I come in here.
But anyways.
This is like all you guys talk about now.
Well, this is a podcast. So
Yeah,
no,
this
it's
is a
not always
podcast.
about.
Oh, damn it.
No, Tio, I'm just saying, joining a server that runs 24/7 on 2 or 3 instances and making a conclusion about what happens all the time is like watching 3 minutes of television a week and thinking all that's on is The Simpsons. But anyways, I'm just going to say, go back to my story. So all of these stories, what was the other one I was about to say? I got
when they put the octopus in your stomach.
Yeah. So, well, they didn't put an octopus in my stomach as far as I know. But I got put in the back of a police car, and I asked the guy, "Who do you work for?" Because I didn't understand why they had picked me up in this case. And he turns around, and again, people who hear this whole story are going to find all of these things fantastical and probably not believe me on podcasts or whatever, but this is all true, you know, so make of it what you will. But anyways, I said, "Who do you guys work for? You know, you don't seem like normal cops." Because the Winnipeg police are usually pretty great, but these guys seem more sinister. So anyways, he turns around and he goes, "We work for the one-eyed grand architect of the universe." Now, obviously, what he should have said is we work for the Winnipeg police force, right, or something like that. But he said we work for the one-eyed grand architect of the universe, which of course doesn't make sense without this gang stalking narrative, basically. And then later, I said, "Well, where are you guys taking me?" What's up?
Sorry, carry on. No, that reference is actually a similar reference to the Freemason version of what is attributed to God, the grand architect of the universe. It's very similar.
That's correct.
Sorry for
Yeah.
interrupting.
No, that's okay. And that's a good point, right? And again, why one-eyed? Well, the eye in the pyramid, right? The eye of Sauron, the one-eyed god, Loki. Or I think maybe it's one of those Norse gods, Odin has one eye. So who knows what that reference is? But the eye in the pyramid, the eye of Sauron, right? That's the one-eyed grand architect of the universe, according to these people. But according to me, I don't believe that is, right? Because I even said to him, I said, my God has two eyes, something along that line, right? So there's kind of an idea there that maybe there's like this one-eyed demiurge or Satan character and this two-eyed god. I don't know. But anyways, later I said, well, where are you guys even taking me anyways? Because I wasn't sure if they're going to try and take me to a psych ward or they're going to take me to a prison or what was going to happen, right? So he says, we're taking you to put an octopus inside your body. Again, completely bizarre. Person hearing this not going to believe me, and yet the true story. So this was gang stalking. There's no question about it, because there's only two possibilities. One, these guys actually did work for the one-eyed grand architect of the universe, and they actually in some sense did or were going to put an octopus inside me, right? Because there's some kind of crazy-ass conspiracy on like the highest, high strangeness levels. Or, much more likely from Occam's razor, they were just trying to fuck with my head by saying this shit. They were trying to either scare me, intimidate me, or drive me further into mental illness or into, psychosis or whatever the case might be by saying things that would freak someone out. But due to the proclivities of my own mentality, I was more or less unfazed by this and found it relatively amusing. However, they then released me in a seemingly random area of the city, but obviously was not random. Now, first of all, ask yourself, why would police, physically, assault someone to force them into the back of a police car, only to tell them some weird shit, drive them somewhere else, and drop them off in a different part of the city, right? That doesn't make any sense from the perspective of policing. But it makes a lot of sense from the perspective of gang stalking, which is trying to fuck with someone's head or gaslight them. So what's a stronger form of gaslighting than police putting you in a car, telling you some weird ass shit, driving you somewhere else, dropping you off, and then that's not the end of it. Because then when I get out of this car, there was actually, so this is an even weirder story than what I've told you before. There was a hospital there, and I went and tried to say hey, I guess I'm supposed to come in this hospital, get checked out or whatever. And the security guards physically assaulted me. The guy grabbed me and bent my wrist back and tried to hurt my arm, and they wouldn't let me into this hospital. But I wasn't doing anything unusual. I was just I need to talk to a doctor or something, because at that time, even though I have my own interpretations of this, I've learned that it's generally best to get involved in the medical system, because the medical system kind of protects you from the legal system and other systems that they can use, in the sense that if I'm going to be targeted, I'd rather be in a hospital where I can at least get a fucking coffee and a sandwich than whatever, right? So it's whatever. And plus, what else was I going to do, right? At this point, they dropped me off here. But anyway, so that was weird, that they not only wouldn't let me into the hospital, but they wouldn't tell me why, which is strange. And secondarily, the guy physically assaulted me, which has never really happened to me before. In that regard, I've been assaulted many times, but never by hospital security staff in that regard. And that's actually, it kind of has happened. But anyways, regardless. Then I go outside and I encounter these two individuals who are obviously part of this gang stalking thing, because they immediately start following me. And it's 100% obvious that they're there for me. They have only interest in me. They're pursuing me. And so it's two Caucasian men on bicycles who are maintaining a steady distance between one another of a few feet, 3 or 4 feet perhaps between one another, and always exactly side by side, never one in front of the other, ever, over the course of hours, always side by side, pedaling slowly at the same slow, methodical pace, keeping up with me as I'm walking away from them, because I know that they're paying strange attention to me, and I don't know who they are. So for simple security reasons, I'm maintaining a safe distance from them. So I'm walking away from them. They're not letting me get away. They're maintaining a steady distance and pursuing me and saying a bunch of weird shit. They're saying we're the two witnesses. They're talking about the return of Jesus Christ. They're asking me questions about hell. And just weird shit that nobody would just ask a random person on the street that they just met. And again, these guys were clearly waiting for me, and they followed me here and there and all around. And it was obvious that they were probably cops. My impression, at least of the one guy, was that he was a police officer. The other guy I couldn't get a read on, and that was weird. And I liked the one guy, even though I knew they were involved in some weird shit. I still kind of thought he was cool, and I told him, I was you're doing a good job. They're probably going to promote you or whatever for this. But the other guy I did not like, and I couldn't get a read on him. I still, even now thinking about him, I feel an animosity or a dislike for him. But anyways, yeah, so they said all this weird, freaky-deaky shit. Now, I'm going to stop that story there, because these stories go on forever. But the point is, that's obviously all gang stalking, because otherwise it makes absolutely no sense. Now, you could say, okay, well, Shogun's crazy. He hallucinated that. And I would entertain that if that were a legitimate, entertainable possibility. But I know enough about my own mental status and situation to know that that kind of thing is not possible. So although no one else can know this, I know for a fact that all of those encounters did actually happen. Right. So the only psychosis element becomes how I interpret it. I remain agnostic about it all, but clearly that is not proper police procedure, and those people were not natural citizens who were following me around.
So yeah, I do want to ask, like, what do you think it all means, and what are the higher implications, and like, where is the money coming from in your framework? How do you understand the back work of this?
Well, big picture, top level, Satan is the god of this world. That's what the Bible says. Satan is the god of this world. He's a great red dragon who holds the whole world in his sway. He has led the whole world astray. He controls all the kingdoms of the earth. He is he who is in the world. He walks to and fro upon the earth, etc., etc. So that's the big picture. Unlike NSA, I don't think this all boils down to Zeta Reticulans. I don't think that's even close to the top level. I don't think it all boils down to intelligence agencies. The intelligence agencies, the Zeta Reticulans, they're part of a hierarchical pyramid structure, but the eye in the pyramid is none other than Satan. And I mean that with all due, solemnity. And also we should invoke the name and blood of Jesus Christ now to counter all these negative forces and the protection of Jesus Christ over ourselves in this chat, in this server, because that is our only protection from forces that control all the kingdoms of the earth.
I see. So on the human level, how high do you think it goes? And how far can they take the technological breaching and the false clicks and the conspiracies and hacking? How high can they go on that level?
Well, we would have to, first of all, say that even the human actors that are capable of these things have powers that we would find almost godlike, due to having, essentially infinite amounts of money, the ability to influence monetary systems themselves, control of banking systems, control of police officers, monopolies on the use of violence, military power, economic power, technology, both known and classified, of science fiction development. So anyways, you might as well point to the intelligence agencies, to the departments of defense, the Pentagon, obviously political forces such as, whatever, all the way up to the president, religious forces, including, the Pope and the Black Pope. And I'm not necessarily saying the Pope is evil or anything like that. The Black Pope being the Jesuit superior general. And yeah, so you could point, of course, to groups like CIA, etc. And again, please don't kill me or whatever, guys. But so just like NSA says, CIA, the NSA, and anything from private individuals to foreign governments. For example, the Cuban situation, a whole bunch of U.S. diplomats got sick because they were targeted by probably the Cubans or some ally of the Cubans with acoustic weaponry. So they were being just in hotels and stuff, but they were all getting sick and having migraines and all these weird symptoms because they were getting hit with acoustic weaponry. So I just want to point out that if anyone's listening to this and like, this guy's completely crazy, this is all batshit, well, take me out of it, okay? This shit is real. Forget about my story. They have acoustic weaponry. They can beam voices into your head. They can reflect your own voice back at you to try and confuse your thinking from a distance. They can produce human voices out of thin air. Like, all of these technologies exist. They can beam voices into your head. They can drive the same message into your head over and over again. They can microwave you and heat up parts of your body, make parts of your body itchy, make parts of your body whatever, tingle, sexual arousal induced or neutralized, like on and on and on. And all of this is documented and all of this is declassified and all of this is essentially public. It's just that most people aren't aware of it. Now, that doesn't mean in any particular case such as mine, you can rule out situations like actual mental illness, drugs, hallucinations, and other mistakes of consciousness, confirmation bias and all the rest. But again, even if you can rule out 90% of these gang stalking cases as just misguided people with paranoid psychosis, it only takes 1 to 5 to 10% of the remaining case being true to prove the point that this shit is going on. So it doesn't mean every single crazy person who thinks they're being gang stalked is actually being gang stalked. And it doesn't mean, like NSA says, that schizophrenia doesn't exist or that mental illness doesn't exist. Although maybe that's the case, I highly doubt it. What it does mean, though, is that because you already have these existing mental illnesses and you already have these agencies willing and able to do illegal, non-consensual, covert citizen experimentation, including on psychological operations and mind control, that those two things fit together like hand in glove, because people who have been diagnosed, in my case, forcibly, right? And I remember when they said, like, you accept your diagnosis, though, right? Like, you accept your diagnosis, right? And it was really important to them that I accepted that I was bipolar and that I had that diagnosis. And why? Well, because once you've slapped a diagnosis on someone, everything else that they report in the realm of gang stalking, targeted individual shit, and harassment is always going to be interpreted by anybody as a natural consequence of that diagnosis. So if I were to go to anybody and say, listen, I'm being followed, they're fucking with my radio, they're fucking with my phone, or anything like that, obviously I'm going to say, yeah, but you're bipolar, so it doesn't mean anything, which makes you a perfect test subject, right? Because whatever crazy ass wackadoo shit they do to you, nobody's ever going to believe you. So it all fits together.
And what tests do you think they want to go and do on these people?
Completely dependent on the situation. So there's basically two things that are happening here. One, the end result user purpose of this technology would be to neutralize political opponents or people who threaten an existing social, economic, or political hierarchy. So if you are someone who has ideas that are dangerous to an established power system, or if you are somebody who is a leader of a movement that is a threat to a group or whatever, then they could just kill you. But what they've learned with Jesus and others is that when you kill a leader, you actually turn them into a martyr, and you can elevate them even, to a higher level and make them an even more powerful force. Look at George Floyd, look at Jesus, look at any number of martyrs in history who became icons precisely because they were killed. So what they've learned is rather than killing someone, it's much better to assassinate their character, frame them, discredit them, drive them crazy, plant things on their computer, or otherwise, you'll frame them, blackmail them, whatever, right? All that kind of shit. That's better because then you take away their power as a symbol and as a leader, which is not accomplished simply by ending their lives. So that's the user end purpose of this technology. But in order to make such a sophisticated technology function effectively, you need to test it extensively, including, quote unquote, in the field. So therefore, drug addicts and mentally ill people, as NSA says, are ideal targets because you can run these experiments on these like homeless people, crazy people, drug addicts who are on the streets. That means they're vulnerable, they're available, you can monitor them, you can see them, they're out in the wild, so to speak. And you can bombard them with shit and nobody's going to believe anything they say. And frankly, nobody cares about them.
Well, that's very comprehensive. I do have more questions for you, Shogun, but I know that Ainsoph and Drakkar here have both experienced this type of stuff, and myself. So I think I'm going to open it up to a free discussion if anyone wants to ask anyone else questions at this point. But I will throw the ball back at Shogun and ask if he has a final say for what he's brought to this table so far before we ask anyone else does that. So do you have any conclusions on what you've put together here, or a final say, Shogun, before we ask any more questions? And I'll open it up for discussion.
Yeah, final closing thought. If this sounds outlandish, just remember, it is not outlandish, but strategic and practical to discredit your opponents, right? This is a valuable capability, and intelligence agencies and groups will and do and have developed and used this technology. So again, just because this technology exists does not mean that any particular person is not suffering from paranoid psychosis or paranoid schizophrenia. But the point of this podcast is not to say, hey, I know for sure I'm a targeted individual. The point of this podcast is to say, hey, I know for sure this shit can and does happen. So it's good for people to be aware of it so that they will have at least some context. If they start experiencing these things, you'll have some protection. It's kind of like a vaccine, right? The vaccine gives you some preparation for dealing with the virus. Well, at least if you know the tactics that these organizations can use, if they start doing this shit to you, like, it doesn't freak me out, right? Like when that guy came up to me and said, oh, I know everything about you, in the sense that he said, are you still running? Are you still doing your training? I know that you said a prayer earlier today. Shit that he wouldn't know. He didn't know me at all, right? Now, someone else might have been freaked out by that. I found it amusing. I find this shit amusing because like NSA, I now understand what's presumably going on, at least to some extent. Whereas if I didn't have all that context, I'd be like, what the fuck is going on? Oh my God. And then that's how they get you to spin out. So that being said, yeah, let's open it up.
So yeah,
Did
Shogun and Ainsoph. Anyone else have anything they'd like to add?
Yeah, I'll make a few comments in relation to that one-eyed archetypal universe. The Bavarian Illuminati, which is an actual secret society that existed in 1776, Bavaria, Germany, used the basically the all-seeing eye, or rather the eye inside the triangle, which has seemed to be now sort of like a cult icon for representation of something that represents something nefarious, such as conspiracy theories relating to the Illuminati. However, that triangle, or the eye in the triangle, exists on the US $1 bill and is considered to be called the Eye of Providence, and is alluded to be connected to the Eye of Horus, which is an Egyptian god back in the ancient Egypt. So there are connections to the worship of these gods in such organizations such as Freemasonry, and maybe various other groups, such as the OTO, which is Aleister Crowley's his own group, even the AA, or the Argentus Atrum, which is another sort of organization, and they all have very similar connections and sort of magic associated with their belief systems, but they all allude to a one-eyed being or godlike figure, which they sort of attribute some spiritual, magical, or supernatural association to. And there seems to be this feeling that I get that that's where they may get their powers from, if they do have such powers. Obviously, they believe it enough to continue to want to practice such ideologies and methodologies that if it works for them, then why would they stop, I suppose, right? So you got to want to think, is what is this one-eyed being represented? As you said, Shogun, regarding the one-eyed god, my understanding or belief would be the idea that the highest level of creator that exists in all of realities, whether that be outside this physical universe or whatnot, like the highest level, would be a consciousness, if it's conscious, stemming from one place, one location. So that would be the one-eyed. In Jewish tradition, it's considered it's called the monad, and from the monad came different steps of realization and actualization that the God of the Bible has been attributed to have descended from. So even though the monad is considered the highest form, it is not the God that is spoken of in the Bible. And so there's various sort of angles and perspectives in relation to that. No, that's not related to gang stalking, but it's related to maybe what the belief system behind these people who are gang stalking sort of pledge allegiance to. So if there is a nefarious reason and there is a supernatural backing, and I say supernatural loosely, so don't quote me in basically in that anti-religious or whatnot. That's not what I'm saying. I say supernatural because it's not from like a worldly type of situation. So that if there is something that's backing it, again, I also don't agree it's alien in nature. And if it was alien in nature, what's controlling that? That would be, again, would be a supernatural thing. So if it's something about control, about targeting people for an agenda, they obviously can be various reasons. Some not so important, others more important. The more important ones would be, I suppose, for total world domination, and from Shogun's perspective, maybe satanic in origin.
So that's the generalized concept regarding that. Specifically for gang stalking or experiences regarding inducing paranoia in someone, I personally went through that experience about 20 years ago. I was drugged with some sort of, I think it was supposed to be a hallucinogenic, but I didn't hallucinate either. All it did was distorted the chemical imbalance in my brain to basically alter my beliefs. So other than my beliefs, and nothing else was distorted. So my vision, my hearing, everything of that was more or less the same. It was just my paranoia was intense. My analysis of what was going on around me may have been distorted, incorrect, or maybe correct. So it's a bit of a weird one. But delusions of grandeur, what was the final diagnosis, and that ended up stemming to a diagnosis of schizoaffective, and that's the main one. There's other diagnoses, but I don't think they're part of this part of the discussion, gang stalking. But the drugging, I believe, okay, so there's this prison system that was designed a long time ago called a panopticon. And a panopticon is a physical prison that's designed physically in a way to reduce the amount of guards, monitor the prisoners, and also designed in a way to make the prisoners believe they are constantly being watched on a permanent or more permanent basis rather than the actual monitoring. So they would think that they'd be monitored by 4 or 5 guards, but in actuality there was only one. And this was done through manipulation of the design of the prisons. So there'd be a center guard tower, and the prison cells were around the outside surrounding it. And so the prisoners would believe that the guards were always watching them, but they didn't have to. So what they found out is that the self-imprisonment of the mind by the individual was more powerful than the actual physical monitoring of a prisoner. And the panopticon system became popular in a way that it also was so less resources were needed. So that was a bonus for governments or private prison companies to utilize. And because there was less people involved, meant less money spent, and that was the panopticon system. So it induced paranoia. Prisoners behaved themselves because they thought they were being watched, and therefore it was a self-monitoring system. Now, I believe what happened with me, with the drug, was a form of a chemical panopticon. What better way to save money in the monitoring of, let's say, of an actual criminal or somebody that needed to be monitored, and you wanted to see what they would do, like stuff up on something or make a mistake, and or you wanted to basically put them into society where they did not misbehave, and they basically uh, functioned above the law. They didn't do anything wrong. And so how could you do this on a mass scale without having to spend a lot of money, a lot of resources, such as police officers or anything like that out in the community? So my idea, and I'm thinking about writing about this concept in a form of fiction, because fiction, I can actually write it in a way that could seem plausible, but it is something I did actually experience. So, I mean, mentally anyway.
Can I just say that can we just see if there's anyone else who wants to talk, because this is a recorded podcast?
That's okay. I think this is all good content. It's all important and good to get out. So if you did want to close up your point, Ainsoph, feel free, and then we'll go back to the Mike.
Yeah, it was just the panopticon system. So the chemical inducing of paranoia on a mass scale was a whole purpose. So no money needed to be spent, resources didn't have to be utilized, and the person behaved. So this is the whole sort of reason behind doing it in such a way. So chemically induced paranoia, whether it be drugs or maybe even through food, and that's like a form of targeted individual and gang stalking. So that's a unique way of doing that. That's all I wanted to say in regards to that.
For sure. That's very interesting. Drakkar, are you here? Because I know Drakkar has experienced some gang stalking and street theater in regards to like helicopters flying around in his house and stuff. So that might be useful to hear, but I don't know if he's actually here. Ainsoph, in the meantime, you did have an experience with people who were performing street theater with you, with who were wearing like black sunglasses and tapping them, right?
Yeah, so that was the initial phase of the whole experience. Inducing the paranoia, so inserting the thoughts, and then obviously after months of remunerating on that, it sort of did the job. So the drugging involved a 6 hour. I would say it was like an interrogation or a form of indoctrination to a mental state, which I had to endure for a long time. So in the place where I was after the taking of the drug, people would be coming up to me and basically tapping their glasses and saying some cues and commands such as, we don't want to kill you, and you saw us coming, and there is sort of like weird sort of sayings and cues, which to me at the time was just very confusing because I had no idea of any of this sort of thing. There was no reason for me to think that something like that would happen, yet it did. So during keywords, I can't remember exactly what they were back then, but kill was actually one of them that I remember specifically. And as they'd say, they'd tap their sunglasses. Of course, the odd thing was it was nighttime. It was in a social district, and there were a lot of people around singing, drinking, dancing, and at nighttime. But people were wearing sort of sunglasses, and it wasn't sort of like the trend. It was semi like business-like sort of people, wearing suits in a way, very dressed up very well, black attire, and sunglasses, obviously. And they would walk up to me, say certain things, and tap them. The other thing was they'd place objects around me. Many times they'd put bottles of water next to me. There were various reasons why they would do that. I think is at the time I thought they were trying to spike the water and for me to continue drinking, but at the same time, I thought it occurred that maybe they were just trying to hydrate me as well. So there could have been positive reasons, although the intention I wasn't unaware. The result is that I presented an action to their first action, so a reaction, and they could monitor my behaviour based on that with the various objects. I was followed on the way home. My friends were driving. Bus stops had these advertising on the side of the billboards, certain cue sentences. They were there, of course. Interpretation is a bit foggy, but things like "You saw us coming," "At night we shine," "We've got you working day and night," and they were made more obvious by my friends, who at the time I thought were my friends, although may have not have been the case. It was kind of a weird experience. They were sort of new friends, and they were pointing out to those signs and actually asking me to read them, which I thought was odd. Why would they want to do that? And yeah, a lot of other experiences. And now, as I said, it was 20 years ago, so it's kind of foggy. That's the street theatre stuff in relation to that.
Well, yeah, that's super interesting and probably super traumatic. There is something that I heard about like them repeating the same words in MK Ultra over and over and over until like they could send somebody out and say that word once and just immediately trigger them, right? So it's interesting that they were repeating key words while doing an action to you. But
Yes,
yeah.
and Rafi, we saw the movie Free Guy. So here's an example of the trigger and the memory, and you were right there witnessing that because I reacted to it. I mean, not in a negative way, but the very fact that it brought up a memory and allowed me to share it with you is a prime example of basically that sort of thing sticking. So in this movie Free Guy, people who are heroes in the movie wear sunglasses. and it's a theme in the beginning of the movie and throughout the movie that if you wore sunglasses, you weren't part of the rest of the environment, but you were a human being in the game or in the movie rather. And that's why they would separate those people from everyone else. And so they were superheroes in a sense. So that was a positive example of my reaction to it, because at least I saw something that didn't make me feel worse, but rather like a sense of relief, bordering on the sense of achievement or something that I can achieve. So it did trigger a lot of a response from me. And just seeing that cue in the movie brought back that memories with sunglasses, and it was very interesting to see the theme being played out after 20 years. Kind of cool.
Thank you, Ainsoph. That's very good contribution and perspective to my, my story and what I'm saying. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Was there anyone else? I know you're doing the interview, but was there anyone else to share anything or ask anything or say anything? All right. So I don't know if you have.
Something.
Yeah, go ahead, Ainsoph.
Sorry, there was this technique called Operation Mindfuck, developed in the 70s, and it was a parody or a satire-based operation to make fun of people who believed in conspiracy theories. The person who designed this concept basically wrote a book trilogy called the Illuminatus trilogy, and that's where the term Illuminati became famous and popular. And a religion was surrounding this whole area of Operation Mindfuck and the Illuminati trilogy. The author started the Discordianism movement, and Discordianism is basically a sort of way of saying discord, such as the platform we're using now, or rather the separation or the non-harmonious function of society and people was a way to live life. So if you were more of a Discordian, you'd be less. I suppose you'd be considered abnormal. And this theme of Operation Mindfuck, I apologize about using the term, but that's the actual name of it, is an actual thing that people were doing. And that's actually the parody name for gang stalking and the street theater. So this concept had a name back in the 70s, which was cultish in nature, but seemed to have a beginning from a series of books and the author who wrote them, and basically started the Discordian fellowship, which had obviously belief systems, gods, all that sort of stuff in relation to Discord. And that again alludes to things like the Eye of Horus and Eris, another goddess of Discord. And some people think that that is the reason behind Operation Mindfuck, to discredit people who believe in conspiracy theories. So it was like a parody against people who believed in these things, and therefore, like the things that we're talking about now, someone who's a audience would laugh it off and basically say they were crazy and whatnot, because that was their attitude. But they would intentionally utilize these sort of things to push people to the brink or to the edge of sanity, but in a way to make fun of them rather than for other reasons, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ainsoph. Do you have anything else you'd like to add, Shogun?
I mean, there's plenty more that we could certainly get into. I mean, this is a subject we've talked about in multiple podcasts. This is really NSA's field more than mine, but I guess at this point I can add it to my fields. Yeah, I mean, I have a lot more to say about it, but it's one of those topics that we never really exhaust, so we can do it in chunks. But again,
Sure. Potentially, you could interview me about my gang stalking stuff and ask me similar questions at the end of that interview, potentially with NSA there, and NSA could back up some stuff after that, and we could get a more rounded take on it.
What I would like to say, though, is you can look at it as like a pyramid of belief, right? So you don't have to believe, like I believe, that, Satan and God and Jesus come into this. If you don't believe in those things, that's not core to the thesis, so to speak. And you don't have to believe like NSA believes and like you believe and like I largely believe that aliens are likely involved in this in some regard. What you should believe, though, if you consider yourself a rational person, is that intelligence agencies, the military industrial complex, and governments and corporations are involved in this, because that's a fact. And again, you can find all these long-range acoustic devices, microwave auditory effects, remote non-lethal weapons, psychological operations, MK Ultra, Project Mockingbird, and all the rest of it is real. So they will discredit people. They will try to frame people. They will set people up. They will suicide people, meaning make it look like they committed suicide, but really they were murdered. All of these are ways to get rid of someone and also at the same time destroy their reputation, their legacy, and their power as a symbol for a cause. So just understand that, just because someone is accused of a crime doesn't mean they committed that crime. Just because someone is called a suicide doesn't mean they weren't murdered. And just because someone went crazy doesn't mean they weren't onto something. So please be aware of these things and understand that even without aliens and God and devils, technology and human intelligence are more than sufficient to use artifacts and agents to interface with your ontologies, meaning what you believe, in order to influence your belief system, your behavior, and drive you towards an undesirable for you outcome, such as suicide, psychiatric hospitalization, public disgrace, whatever the case may be. So be on guard against the devil and his tools. And remember, we are not at war with flesh and blood, but with powers and principalities of darkness and wickedness in heavenly places. That's from the Bible. And the weapons of our warfare are not corporeal, but spiritual, but powerful even to the pulling down of fortresses. Therefore, I will conclude by praying, as we always do, for the server, for everybody in it, and for myself. No weapon forged against us shall prosper, and every tongue raised in accusation against us we shall condemn. For righteousness is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, thus saith the Lord. Furthermore, if you find yourself under these circumstances of spiritual or gang stalking oppression, you should plead the name and blood of Jesus Christ, and you should also put on the full armor of God, being the breastplate of righteousness, the helmet of salvation, the shield of faith, the sword of the word of God, the belt of truth, the gospels, the boots of the gospel of peace, because these are our protections so that on the dark day we may take our stand against Satan and his schemes and prevail. So in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, everybody in the live audience, for joining us for this event. Please subscribe to us on the Roundtable Podcast YouTube channel and join our Discord, The Roundtable. There's a link in the description to all of this, plus our 3 other YouTube channels, our BitChute, and our merch store. So please do all of that. Thank you so much for listening. This conversation was great. There will probably be a part 2 coming in the next week or so. Thank you so much, Shogun and Ainsoph, for your contributions. I really appreciate it. And yeah. Please, we can move up to the Roundtable voice chat.